All very, very, very little movement among the top 10, almost identical. Utah moved up more than anybody, up to number 10, but everything else seems to be about the same.
Yeah, and, no offense to anybody who's below the top 10, but there's really only 9 schools or so, or 9 scenarios that you can see going in. So there's plenty of people that, aren't involved in this. So I personally, like when I hear somebody say, like, hey, we're 18th in the CFP rankings. So, I mean, like, what does that mean? That means you're going to maybe get a better bowl game than if you weren't, but at the end of it, you're still not in the CFP. So the top 4 is what matters, and the ones immediately after them are what matters. And that hasn't changed, and nothing's happened to make it change, particularly the top 4, which is the only thing that really matters. And the only thing that's going to happen outside of upsets for Georgia and Tennessee or Georgia and TCU in the next couple weeks will be the result of the Ohio State-Michigan game. And if it's like last year, where Michigan blew out Ohio State, then things get a little wonky. But if it's a nip and tuck game and pretty much I think what we all expect it to be, then it could get pretty interesting.
Well, then it gums up everything,
end,
right? Yeah.
Because then you could have, a conference champion, say TCU and Georgia finish undefeated. This is one of the many scenarios that can happen. TCU and Georgia finish undefeated and both win their conferences. Okay? Then the winner of Ohio State and Michigan will also have probably finished undefeated unless Iowa gets them in the title game. And I'm sorry I laughed there, but let's be honest here, that's probably not going to happen. So
it means it will.
So but there's 3 undefeated teams, and then that 4th team will be a team that's either won their conference with 1 loss, like Clemson, North Carolina, those would be the most outside because of the way the committee clearly feels about the ACC. And those 2 teams, or a Pac-12 team with 1 loss, which really at this point is only USC. So they would have to win out themselves. Or a team, the Pac-12 champion with 1 loss, which would be USC. Then you have to get
if they run the table.
Right. Then you get into the fact of, okay, now you've got Tennessee and the Ohio State-Michigan loser, who will both have 1 loss but not have played in their conference title game, which I don't think is much of a hindrance when it comes to those 2 conferences, even though it probably should be when you're comparing everyone's resume.
Well, the SEC's had that happen before, and actually one time I think it was Alabama got back in, even though they didn't play in the championship game, and they won the whole thing. Ohio State, remember, wasn't there a year? Was there a year? Well, it wasn't 14 because they beat the hell out of Wisconsin for the Big Ten title. But yeah, there does seem to be. And here's the problem. In the SEC, LSU is 6. We know they're as hot as anybody in college football. But the team in front of them is Tennessee, who boat raced them. Boat raced them. And Tennessee's not going to play. Well, they beat Alabama by 3. Right?
Yeah.
And boat raced LSU. To me, if you're Alabama, you're done, even though you're at number 8. Although, who knows, there's scenarios if all hell breaks loose. But what is LSU's chance when one of the teams in front of them, who should win their last 2 games and not play in the conference title game, how can LSU get ahead of Tennessee in any way, shape, or form when Tennessee blew their doors off earlier in the year? And it wasn't like 8-9 weeks ago. They beat them badly. So that's got to be something. Right now, LSU just wants to keep winning. So how does can LSU bypass Tennessee if they get to the championship game, beat Georgia, but the team in front of them that's beaten them badly doesn't play in the conference championship game?
Yeah, see, that's another interesting scenario there because LSU will have 2 losses and they've got a great ranking right now. I just kind of feel like they're setting LSU up to be 5th. Like at the end of this thing, LSU could be 5th or 6th to be like, oh, had you only not lost that first one. And he only not lost the first one.
The Florida State game, which was a crazy ending.
Yeah, and he only not lost a game.
But they got blown. It's not like Alabama, and Alabama's lost twice. And both times it was on basically the last play of the game. LSU's lost twice. Last play of the game, the muffed extra point, was that what it was against FSU? And they got blown out by Tennessee. And I don't know how you separate that. Does the championship game overshadow the fact someone beats you by 20-something points? That's ahead of you.
I don't think so. I don't think so. But, if you do it, because then you're like, what you're also saying is the SEC championship is more important than any other championship. Because, you know, that you want to talk about the regular season not mattering?
Yeah.
Like, that's one of the arguments is the regular season. Like, if you expand the playoff, the regular season won't matter, which it's absolutely the inverse. The regular season matters that much more and for more people. But you want to talk about the regular season not mattering? If all you have to do to get in the playoff is have 2 or less losses and win the SEC title, then, you know, what does that say about, you know, what Georgia would have no penalty for that because they would only have 1 loss. They still have a better record than LSU and just lost to them.
Right.
You know, they and look, I think we, like, in past iterations of the championship made this mistake before. Oklahoma still went and played in the Sugar Bowl
against LSU.
Yeah, when
despite Kansas State
demolished them.
Beat them badly.
Demolished them in the championship game.
Well, what about Colorado, Nebraska? Nebraska doesn't play in the Big 12 title game. Colorado then beats Texas. Now, Colorado that year had a game loss or 2 or 3, and they played Miami.
Yeah.
So, I was like, oh, by the way, you don't probably deserve it, but nobody else can beat them, so let's just throw you to the wolves.
And here we get into the problem with the committee is that while, yes, strength of schedule matters, there also needs to be some uniformity in what you've accomplished because there's no way that you can just create better strength of schedule during the year. You can schedule out in advance. I'll give you the example of the Florida State team in 2014 that went undefeated, wound up 4th. They were the defending national champions, wound up 4th in the first CFP, got rolled by Oregon in the Rose Bowl.
The year after they won the national title.
Yeah, and they were on a 29-game winning streak at that point. There was scuttlebutt about, well, their schedule wasn't good enough. But if you look at their schedule before they made it, it was great. They're playing Oklahoma State in a neutral site game. They had Notre Dame. Like, all those teams wound up being middle of the road, but it wasn't FSU's fault in 2014.
It's like Michigan's schedule.
Michigan's schedule, yeah.
Right. And
so, like,
Michigan kind of like, what about your schedule? And sometimes, you know, here's the thing. Year in and year out, they always have somebody. Maybe it's Notre Dame or somebody else. Year in and year out. And then every once in a while, who was on yesterday that we asked about? When I asked about their non-conference, North Carolina.
Yeah.
Their non-conference schedule is a little bit, although Notre Dame, I guess, counts.
Yeah.
Even though it's something that's forced by the conference based on the way their scheduling comes out.
And so, like, you just need strength of schedule, I think, certainly needs to be part of it, but I think that needs to be part of it once you've filtered out, if everybody has the same record and same standards, and you're talking about, especially when you get to 4 teams. When you get to 12, this matters probably a little bit less because when we get to 12, I think the argument between 12 and 15 will be the really only one. Everything else will probably fall into place pretty automatically, I think. But, and there won't be much need for consternation because you'll know who the 10 or 11 best teams are. That 12th team might be the one that's, oh my God. But I think that if you are all 12-1 and won your conferences,
it's hard to argue that.
It's hard to argue that. And there's 5 of them.
Head-to-head did not matter in 14 the first year.
So,
why are we thinking head-to-head will matter if Tennessee and LSU?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's right.
Except that was 61-58 compared to 42-17.
There's also a championship game, which is that data point. But so say there's 5 12-1 teams.
Well, LSU will have the championship game.
Yeah, that's true. So they'll have that data point. But they'll say there's 5 12-1 games. Teams, which is more likely than 5 undefeated teams, but there could be 5 12-1 teams that all won their conference. Strength of schedule should only come into it at the point of what's the difference between number 5 and number 1
with 12-1 records
all the way down the line. Yeah. Now, if you're, 12-1, like 13-0, 13-0, 12-1, and then you have like 10-2, 10-2. And all that, then I think the 12-1 team goes no matter if the 10-2 team or 11-2 team won the championship over somebody else.
I want to ask the chat room this, and also